So last week, we spent an entire 2 hours and 20 minutes, give or take, talking about one sensory system and one sensory system only, right, Sean? And that sensory system was vision. Okay. This week, we're going to take just about that same amount of time and talk about every single other sensory system that you have. Okay. So we're just going to cram them all into one today. So it's going to be exciting. Why can we do that? One, because that's how the book's written. Two, because that's what I said we're going to do. But three, we know a whole lot more about vision than we do the other senses. On top of that, a lot of the basic principles that we learned in that vision chapter apply to these other sensory systems. So we don't have to relearn the process of transduction, right, Rosie? We talked about that, right? And so now I'm going to say, hey, remember that transduction thing? Here it is. We're doing it again. This time we're doing it in your ear, not in your eye. But it's the same idea, same concept. Details are a little different, right? So we're going to do that. It's going to be exciting. Secondly, we know, as I said, we know a whole lot about vision, but the reason we know a whole lot about vision is because your retina has been so accessible for centuries, right? It's only relatively recently that we've been able to get in and think about the other sensory systems, right? We've been able to look at your retina ever since Helmholtz invented that ophthalmoscope, right? And that was pretty awesome. I just want to take an informal survey quickly. For those of you that have ever been to an eye doctor, would you care to raise your hand? Now, would you care to leave your hand up if they dilated your pupils? So how many of you have been to the eye doctor and they didn't dilate your pupils? Do either of you happen to be from Ohio? No? You're giving me this weird look like that's an odd question. I think it is an odd question. In my other class, not in my psychopharm class, we were talking about a drug that they use to dilate your pupils, atropine, right? And there were two individuals in that class who have been to the eye doctor regularly and have never had their pupils dilated, which I thought was standard practice. They both happened to live in Ohio, so I didn't know if it was... See, I know I'm like putting together a story, right? I don't know. I don't have enough data to say, so I'm just trying to collect more data about dilation.
To an eye doctor in Ohio that didn't do it, but my doctor in Huntington does.
That's adding some support to my...
I grew up in Ohio, they did.
They did?
Mm-hmm.
What part of Ohio?
Dayton.
Well, that's the acceptable part.
Okay.
The-
My eye doctor in Parkersburg has never dilated my eyes. And I've been going to the eye doctor since I was in like 6th grade.
Huh. I mean, that could just be Parkersburg.
Maybe it's just that one particular doctor.
I don't know.
I don't know. Maybe.
Okay. Well, there you go. We'll work on this. Jacob, write up a survey. We'll publish the results. All right. Let's talk about sensory systems. We are going to talk about audition. For those of you that don't know, that's the ear. We're going to talk about the vestibular system. That's balance. I feel like I should draw like... It's supposed to be like scales, but that didn't work out very well. I don't know. Somatosenses. Soma means body. So we're going to talk about touch, tickle, pain, temperature, and also that great sense you have of how much oxygen is dissolved in your blood. That's a great one. We'll talk about that when we get there. Yeah, that's a puzzler. We'll talk about it. We'll talk about taste and we'll talk about smell. These guys are known as the chemical senses because they sense chemicals. This is a brain. This is your brain on a slide. I thought it was a good joke. Nobody else did. Did you guys, I don't know, maybe you're too young for those, like, this is your brain on drugs commercials, other than it just being like a total joke. Hey, you know what surprised me the other day? True story. I go visit my nephew. He's 11. He'll be 11 next week. The kid's wearing a Dare shirt. That's what I thought. I thought like the only people pushing for that were drug dealers because it actually increases drug. It was so ineffective that it actually increased drug use. But he's like wearing this Dare shirt. I'm like, where'd you get that? 1986? He's like, no, they gave it to me at school today. I was like, well, good luck. Was Dare a thing when you guys were kids? Yeah. Well, there you go. It did. No, you can look up, you can search this. It was so ineffective, it actually increased drug use. That's bad. That's bad. All right, so here's your brain. Remember when we talked about primary visual cortex? That was awesome. We're also going to today talk about primary auditory cortex, primary gustatory cortex, primary somatosensory cortex, primary olfactory cortex, right? There's a primary cortex, sensory cortex, for every sensory modality, right? Then we need to be able to integrate these senses, right? What's really awesome is when you can take something you hear and something you see and something you touch and integrate that into one cohesive experience, right, Rosie? You're not walking down the street, wait a minute, I'm going to look at everything, all right, now I'm going to listen to everything. No, it's all happening at one time. It's coming in one stream. It's originally segregated into these like small parts, but then we have these sort of sensory association areas. Most of this is going to be out in your parietal cortex, okay? But those are going to collect information from different sensory modalities, put that together into that cohesive experience, because you want to be able to use those various sensory modalities to create a nice environment for you, right? And we're going to talk a little bit today about a few times when you get conflicting information, right, between a couple of your sensory modalities and the problems that causes. One of those problems is vomiting. It's nausea, right? Anybody get vertigo? Yeah. So we'll talk a little bit about vertigo today, why that happens sort of from a sensory perspective. It'll be kind of interesting. Please don't vomit on us. You're worried because it's the person. You can move over if you want. Nobody will be. Okay. Just. So Sean, this one's just for you. We hear sounds. I didn't know if you knew that. I know that's like revolutionary. It's brand new. We hear sounds. They put that on the slide. I left it there because I thought it was ridiculous. That they really have to tell you that we hear sounds, right? I mean, it's just, I don't know what the authors of this book think about your intelligence, but obviously they thought you did something else with sounds. I mean, I guess you do. You also make sounds, but you don't hear other things, right? What happens is an object's going to vibrate. It's going to move some molecules of air. These guys travel about 1,200 kilometers per hour. For those of you that aren't all up on the metric system, that's known as fast. Right? We're talking about something probably over 500 miles an hour. Anybody know the speed of sound? It's also called Mach 1, right? That's an easy number to remember, 1. That's how fast that is. I'm also required, it's in my contract I sign every year, that at this point in my lecture I have to ask you, do you know the first person to break the sound barrier? Right? You know why I have to ask this, right? Yeah, it's Chuck Yeager, right? So I have to ask you that. So there you go. I'd be really impressed if you could tell me the aircraft he was flying when he broke the sound barrier. It's okay. It was the Bell X-1. Don't worry about it. Got a Chuck Yeager autograph at home. That's a true story. I used to have it hanging in my office, but it doesn't match my new walls. These things are going to vibrate 30 to 20,000 times per second. We're going to measure this in something called hertz. It is spelled just like the rental car company. And it always is going to be capitalized. You know how you don't capitalize feet? You know, if something's like 3 feet long. You capitalize hertz because it's named after a guy. Guess what his name was? It was Hertz. Yeah, it was pretty obvious right there. He's the guy who said, hey, stuff vibrates, and we should measure that. This sound is going to vibrate. It's going to get into our ears, right? It's going to get to those receptor cells. These guys are called inner hair cells. They're cool. When they get vibrated by these sound waves and other things are vibrating, we'll talk about that process. They actually are mechanically, deflected. There's some like little cilia sticking up. They get deflected. It's going to open ion channels. Ions come in. It's going to cause action potentials, and you're going to go, all right, that was a noise. Here's a speaker. Look at these areas of low concentration, high concentration. These are the waves, right? If we were to plot that, we could see the peaks and the valleys in that wave. This guy is your pinna, or outer ear. How many of you use earbuds? How many of you use earbuds? Because you're all going to go deaf. Because there's a real problem with earbuds. And that problem is it bypasses this awesome device that evolution gave you called your outer ear. It's there for a reason. It's not just to like hang earrings or put your eyeglasses on. Okay? It's for funneling sound into your ear. And when you bypass that, you're really bypassing that natural process that helps you attenuate sounds properly so that you can perceive those. It's part of this devious plan that Steve Jobs started before he died. See, the next phase of the business model in about 15 years is for Apple to start selling hearing aids. You guys don't know this, right? They leaked this document recently. So they have the earbuds. They're going to cause you to go deaf. Then they're going to sell you the hearing aid attachment for your iPhone. It's devious. It was brilliant, but it was devious. So there you go. Really, if you have the opportunity, go over the ear. It's going to be safer for you in the long run. It's a little more expensive. Sometimes it looks a little goofy. I know it's not as conspicuous, right? Or it's not as inconspicuous, but it's going to be better for your long-term hearing. And it just gives you better quality sound, right? So there you go. I've been telling people this for years, that you're going to be the first generation of folks who are going to lose your hearing before people older than you, right? So that's something to look forward to. And I've been telling people this for years, and finally, like 2 years ago, they run an article in the New York Times saying the exact same thing. I was like, I've been telling you guys this. So sound gets funneled in. That's awesome. Comes in through your ear canal, also known as the auditory meatus, for all you people who love those Latin words. It's going to pound around here on the tympanic membrane, also known as the eardrum. That's going to cause vibration of your auditory ossicles. You can see one of them there, also known as your inner ear bones, right? Your middle ear bones. Those are the malleus, the incus, and the stapes, the hammer, the anvil, and the stirrup. We'll talk about those more when we need to. The point of that is these sound waves that come in, if you did not have the inner ear bones, you wouldn't be able to transition that sound wave from air to something we call endolymph. Okay? So endolymph is this jelly substance that's going to be in your cochlea, right? How many of you have ever punched through air? Most people have punched through air, right? You can do it right now if you want. Just swing around. How many of you have ever punched through water? Yeah. Which one's easier? Air. It's obvious, right? It was sort of a rhetorical question. So, vibrations are coming through air, then they're going to shift over to water, right? They're this jelly substance. So we need to have something to help that transition so we don't lose too much power, right? Because if your sound waves are coming in this big, and then all of a sudden they get in the water here, then they go to this big, and guess what? You don't hear that. You've got to have something to help transition that, right? So they don't just bounce off and go back out. We already talked about pitch. Think about frequency. How many times is something vibrated per second? We measure that in hertz. Cycles per second. You can just think about vibrations per second, up and down. Not a big deal. Loudness is going to be the amplitude of the sound wave. So that's high amplitude. Here's something low amplitude. Notice, Kata, it has the same frequency, right? Same number of peaks, same number of troughs per unit of time, but one of them's loud and one of them's not. Then we have this interesting thing called timbre. Anybody a musician? What instrument? Percussion. That's not helpful. I mean, it's harder with percussion because you can't just go like, oh, well, you're playing the snare drum, right? Because you don't really play notes you play timed notes, not pitched notes, really, right? So I really wanted you to play the trumpet. but since
You can pretend.
you can pretend. A lot of people who play the trumpet pretend, right? And then there are people who, I don't know. Actually, I used to play the drums, Jacob. Yeah, it was pretty awesome. I had this beautiful pearl set that I bought from someone for like $300, and I sold it for like $450. Yeah, that was pretty good. And then he sold it to somebody for like $600. And then I looked it up online like a year ago. It's like $1,500. It was a vintage jazz set from the '60s. I really should not have gotten rid of it. Yeah, things happen. So let's imagine you're a trumpet. Okay, you guys know what the trumpet is, right? Now, on a trumpet, you can play a note, and I'm going to ask you what your favorite note is, and you're going to tell me like the 8th note, but that's not going to be what I want. I want something like a C sharp, right? So you're going to play that C sharp. Okay? By the way, that's an octathorpe, not a $, sorry. Also known as a hashtag. In case you didn't know what the octathorpe was, or the pound sign. That's the sharp sign. So you're going to play the C sharp. You can do that on a trumpet. And you can do that at what, like 75 decibels. That's probably not very loud. Let's say 100 decibels, right? That's an amplitude. C sharp, 100 decibels. Trumpet. What's another instrument? Saxophone. That's an instrument, right? We're not going to get into a discussion about whether it's like an alto or a baritone sax. We're just going to leave it as a sax. You can also play that C sharp. And you can also play it at 100 decibels. Now, most people know that a trumpet sounds differently than a saxophone, right? Okay? You're going to be able to tell the difference. That difference is going to be timbre, right? So you've got your main frequency, that C sharp. It's pretty awesome. But on top of that, you've got these other sort of smaller frequencies that are altering that sound wave just a little bit, right? That's the timbre. And if you were, so there's your trumpet, and if you were the saxophone, maybe it looks like this. Okay? They're two slightly different waveforms, even though that main frequency, that C sharp, is going to be the same. So they'll sound different, even though the pitch and the loudness are the same. So that's pretty interesting, right? Here it is represented graphically for you. High pitch, you want to think about like Alvin from the Chipmunks. You guys know the Chipmunks, right? That's a good reference. Low frequency, I always think about Barry White. If you guys aren't familiar with Barry White, you're missing out on about 2/3 of what makes life worth living. I would recommend, Caroline, putting that in your playlist, and it's definitely going to change your life, right? Anybody not familiar with Barry White? Nobody's going to admit to that now, right? It's worth your time. Alvin and the Chipmunks you can do without, I think, right? Here we go. Here's like loudness. This is going to be, what was Alvin's dad's name? Like Dave, right? You know, he's always like yelling at Alvin, so it's going to be loud. And this soft one is going to be, you know, that guy who's like a creepy whisperer. Everybody knows one of those, right? So that's your creepy whisperer, right? So it's going to be really soft and kind of weird. Here is timbre. Most natural sounds are going to be very complex. They're going to have those extra sound waves riding on top. There are some things that are going to be simple tones, what we call a pure tone. Certain, probably the only ones you're going to run into on a daily basis are like cell phone ringtones, right? Some of you have that nice little chime, you know, just like that one kind of ring. That's something that's probably a pure tone. Questions about this? Great. Hey, look at this. It's an ear. Or most of an ear. The front part's been cut off, but you'll be fine. Remember, pinna, sound wave comes in. The cool thing about this pinna is it's actually such that it is, its structure is such that it perfectly attenuates a particular range of frequencies. And that range of frequencies match human speech, right? And if you think about this, what are the most important sounds you will ever hear in your life? They're words that people say to you, right? Human speech is probably one of the most important things you will ever hear. You guys can hear the HVAC system. That's not very important, right? What happens if you can't hear it? Well, it's not the end of the world. But if you can't hear someone talking to you, it makes sense to sort of have that particular range of sounds as the one that you're specifically tuned to pick up. Going through the ear canal, we hit that tympanic membrane. Here are your auditory ossicles, your middle ear bones, malleus, incus, and stapes. The sound waves are going to be transmitted through these three bones. You're going to apply a little extra leverage to that, and they're going to start pounding on the cochlea, right? And there's some endolymph in there. There's this jelly substance. We need to vibrate that jelly substance so we can send that wave through the curling there of your cochlea and perfectly activate just the right inner hair cells that are responsive to a particular frequency of sound. It's pretty cool, right? Guess who already talked about all this stuff? We did. Could skip over that. We do want to talk a little bit more about the inside of the cochlea. Inside of this you have something called inner hair cells. You also have outer hair cells. We'll talk about those later, but it's important to know that these are inner hair cells. These are the guys that are doing sensory transduction. Remember, your brain runs and understands, it runs on and understands electrical signals, right? That's it. It doesn't understand sound waves. You could blast your brain with sound waves all day long, and guess what's going to happen? Your brain's not going to do anything, right? Because it doesn't understand that stimulus. You have to take that stimulus and convert it into an electrical signal, and that's going to happen through your inner hair cells. These guys have cilia. They're just little finger-like things that stick up. When that sound wave comes through and it causes that vibration, it's going to cause vibration at a particular location out on the cochlea. Okay? It's going to cause these guys to move around a little bit. It's going to rip open some ion channels. Ions are going to flow through it, and that's going to cause a signal to go through your auditory nerve. It's pretty awesome, right? These outer hair cells are actually kind of cool too. They're involved in something called gain control. This is an important concept in sensory systems. We're not going to go into it too much because it's fairly complex. Basically what happens is once you receive some sound and it goes up to your brain will send down information saying, hey, here's the stuff I've been hearing lately. Maybe you could tune yourself a little bit to anticipate that kind of sound, and then we can better analyze and predict what's going on. So it's kind of a cool process. Sort of predictive. What else do we need to know here? Oh, hey, who's heard of cochlear implants? Yeah, what do cochlear implants do? They actually bypass this process, right? So they bypass that inner hair cell business. You'll put a speaker sort of on the outside of the head. It's going to receive those sound waves, right? And then there will be metal electrodes in the auditory nerve here. We have to select which fibers of the auditory nerve carry which frequency, right? Which ones are responsible for that frequency, okay? If we stimulate the correct fiber, we send that information to the brain, and that can be interpreted as a sound, right? It's just going to be an electrical signal. Again, it's all about that sensory transduction. Don't worry about that too much. We already talked about this stuff. We talked about the cilia. We did not talk about the tip link, which is what, and I have a diagram in a moment that'll show you. So if these are your cilia, the tip link connects these cilia so that when they move, you'll have embedded in here an ion channel, sort of at these locations. And when these cilia move, right, so if they move in this direction, it'll put some strain on those ion channels and it'll rip them open. So it's kind of cool. When they move in the other direction, nothing happens because there's not any tension. Alright. Here's sort of a simplified view of your ear again. This is your cochlea unrolled a bit, right? If we think about your cochlea and we realize that as we move through here, it's different frequencies, right? So it's higher frequencies here near the base, and it's lower frequencies as we get out to the tip. This section of the cochlea is very brittle. It's not very flexible, right? That's why it's more responsive to high frequencies. As you move out, it's more flexible. It's more likely to respond to lower frequencies. Okay? This is one of the reasons that when you have age-related hearing loss, the first frequencies that you're going to lose are your high frequencies. Okay? When I was in graduate school, I remember the local Walmart at night would play high-frequency sounds in the shoe department because apparently there were like a number of younger folks who would come in and try to steal shoes. And so they would play this high-frequency sort of squealing noise to deter young people from going there, but old folks could come in and, you know, get their clogs or mules or whatever kind of, I don't know what shoes people buy. I'm just making things up at this point. And so they could come in and it was fine. Also, more relevant to you, some of you may have, downloaded one of those high-frequency notifications on your phone, right? So that when you can sit in class and you think, oh, that old social studies teacher I had in 11th grade, she couldn't hear anything. And you could have that high-frequency tone. You knew you were getting a message, but she didn't, right? Nobody tried that one. Someone looks guilty. Questions about that? So you're going to lose your high frequencies first. So you guys will probably see that in about 10 years if you keep using those earbuds. So there you go. This is why if you, here's a tip. How many of you are afraid to tell your parents about bad grades? Just do it in the highest pitched voice you have. Because they probably won't hear it. And then you can say, yeah, we talked about that. Don't you remember? Sydney, that's good advice. No? Well, there you go. Here are your inner hair cells. Cilia. Remember that time I talked to you about the tip link? This is that business right there. When they lean from short to long, they lean in that direction, puts tension on that ion channel, rips it open. Previously, this is new. You guys didn't even realize how new this was. Previously, I had told you, how do we open an ion channel? We use a neurotransmitter, right? And now I'm telling you, you don't need a neurotransmitter. You just need those cilia to move in the right direction, right? And just rip that open mechanically. So, Rosie, this is brand new, right? You weren't ready for that today. But there it is. They still open. What happens when they open? In this case, it's also a little different. Actually, potassium and calcium will enter. Don't worry about why. Just know positive ions are coming in. We know when positive ions come in, we are more likely to fire that action potential, right? So there you go. That's exciting. Sean, you got a question, or you just... That's okay. You hate those, like, on the back of the arm, right? Those are the worst, because they're, like, so hard to... You wouldn't think, like, that's hard to reach, but it surprisingly is. Especially if you're wearing, like, because I wear a lot of sweatshirts, too, and you're like, you can't scratch through it. You know what they should do? Make shirts that have, like, sandpaper on the inside. And then you can just, like, move around a little bit. This is an idea, folks. Put that in the patent file. Self-scratching shirts. Think about it, too. It's also got some exfoliating properties. Right? I bet it would help even remove, like, unwanted body hair if you moved around enough and just sand it right off. It's like a triple threat. Jacob, you didn't write that down. I feel like that's going to come on TV right after the Ron Popeil Pocket Fisherman. Who remembers that sensory, that visual system? And we went, this was pretty easy. We had an eye. Where'd we go from the eye? We went to the LGN, right? And from the LGN, we went to primary visual cortex, or V1. Not a big deal. It's a pretty straightforward process. There was that partial decussation business in there. That really wasn't that confusing, right? Okay. You just know if you see it on the left side, it's going to the right. If you see it on the right side, it's going to the left. Not a big deal. When we talk about the auditory system, and I'm going to draw a great looking ear here. Stick a little hair on it. When we go from the ear, we're eventually going to try to get to primary auditory cortex. We're also at some point going to stop off at a place called the medial geniculate nucleus. But before we get there, we're going to do this. We're going to make some twists and turns, and we're going to go different places. The reason we do this, how many of you really enjoy knowing where a sound is originating? Yeah, this is helpful, right? Somebody's behind you, and you hear a noise, you know which direction to turn, right? You know where it is. So localizing sound is important. How do we localize sound? We localize sound by comparing the inputs to the left and the right ear simultaneously, right? If something hits the right ear before it hits the left ear, guess which way we know it is? It's a little bit to the right. If it's louder when it hits one ear than the other because sound diminishes over distance, then we know, your head has some width. You can measure that if you want. Then you know it's a little bit to one side or the other, right? So that's pretty cool. Caroline could probably tell you all about that. I'm not going to ask you to. For those of you really interested in this, there's a beautiful class being taught next semester by probably the best faculty in the psych department. It's called Sensation and Perception. It's a whole semester of sensory systems. How great of a class is that, Caroline? I'll step out if you want to give them an impartial assessment. Did you take that 2 years ago? Or it wasn't last year, was it? Are you serious? You weren't in that class? Which other class of mine did you take? I know you've been in one of my other classes. Are you sure you didn't take this class? I'm going back to my office after class, and I'm going to look up your transcript. And I'm going to see which class you've taken.
It must have been forever ago.
It was like 2 years ago. Jacob, I'm right about this, I promise.
I've been here for so long, I don't know.
Then why did you think you knew so much about it? If you hadn't taken my class. All right, Caroline. Did you think about taking my class and then maybe dropped it? Because I'm convinced in my office there's another sheet of paper with your face on it. Because I print these out every semester.
Maybe I did.
Go to DegreeWorks and see which class it was.
Come back to you.
Yeah. All right. Well, all the same. Apparently it was a really impactful class. But we do need to compare information left and right. When information comes in, look, we're doing crossing here, we're doing crossing there, and then we're going up. There's a lot of extra business going on in the auditory system. I'm not expecting you to memorize this, but just be aware it's a little more complicated because we do need to compare those left ear and right ear inputs so we can use sound localization, right? These are some of those brain regions. I'm not going to expect you to know too much there. You should know a little about the medial geniculate nucleus. That's kind of that guy in the thalamus next to the lateral geniculate nucleus that processes auditory information, not visual information. Here we've unrolled your cochlea again. This is showing you something called tonotopic mapping. Now there's a word that I'm recognizing now, Sydney, I did not use when I told you about the visual system. And that is either visuotopic or retinotopic. But we discussed this concept, right? We said there is a visual hemisphere, a visual world you can see, right? And that is mapped onto your retina because there are cells that are responsible for each little piece of that. That map is translated to your primary visual cortex, and it actually stays relatively intact as it moves to higher visual areas. That's what we mean by visuotopic or retinotopic. They really mean the same thing. One's just referring to the retinal map, and one's referring to the actual visual world, but that visual world is mapped, Jaron, right onto the retina, so it's the same map. They're just sort of inverted and twisted a little, right? That's really awesome because that gives us a pretty quick assessment of where something is located, right? if you have something activating cells that are responsible for this receptive field, guess what? You know what's right there, right? That's where you know. There's not really any extra work there. When you move into the auditory system, because we're using that subcortical crisscrossing for sound localization, okay, we're not going to have that same kind of map in the cochlea. What we have instead is a tonotopic map. So it's mapped according to pitch. So the higher pitches are here, the lower pitches are out here, right? And as we move through the cochlea, there's some continuous progression from high to low, okay? That same map is carried over to the primary auditory cortex. It's still mapped from high to low. So, 400 hertz is next to 500 hertz, is next to 600 hertz, is next to 700 hertz, right? It's going to be that same kind of mapping. It's not a jumbled mess. It's organized according to frequency. That's pretty cool, right? How many of you knew that? Great. How many of you know it now? That's slightly better. How many of you are going to know it by October 11th? Yeah, that's about what I thought, 4 of you. We're not going to get too wound up about this particular diagram. We will, however, revisit the auditory cortex when we talk about human communication. So that's going to be awesome, right? And we're going to talk about brain regions here and back here. We'll talk about Broca's area, which we already mentioned, and we'll talk about Wernicke's area. We'll talk about some of their connections. We'll even talk about stuttering when we talk about human communication, some of the underlying connections there in the white matter, which is actually pretty fascinating. This is a guy with a cochlear implant. This is a little bit of an older image, older style cochlear implant. They look a little different now. The hardware is not really what is advancing. It's the same basic process, right? You're going to collect sounds here, you're going to go through here and stimulate the auditory nerve, right? Now if you've got an issue with the auditory nerve, if you have an issue with your central nervous system brain regions that process sound, a cochlear implant will not help you. It only helps you if you have a problem with your cochlea, okay? Where there has been some significant advances lately has actually been in the software that interprets those sounds and codes them and sends them through to the different electrodes that are in the auditory nerve. So it helps create sounds that are more reflective of what's occurring in the natural environment for folks with cochlear implants. And there'll probably be significant advances in cochlear implants, other things, retinal prosthetics, other such sort of ways to bypass the primary sensory apparatus, right? Because again, if the whole thing is simply about getting an electrical signal into your brain, we can do that, right? I could put an electrical signal into all of your brains if I wanted, right? I'm not going to have any idea what that signal means to you because I'm not going to understand that code, right? But as we better understand the code that's coming in, then we can better mimic that in individuals whose sensory apparatuses don't perform like they would like for them to. That's pretty cool, right? Don't worry too much about this. It's a little bit of complicated stuff. If you want to learn more about it, take that class next semester. It's going to be a blast. We already talked about spatial location, how we know where things are, arrival time, and we also talked about intensity, right? I'm not going to worry too much about timbre. Sean, I'm going to assume that my voice is louder for you than it is for Jaron because there's, 15 feet between the two of you. So over that distance, my, the intensity of the sound waves diminishes some, right? Okay. Which is good, right? Don't worry about this diagram. Hey, how many of you have ever been in a complex environment? Yeah, it happens all the time, right? You've been outside, you've been at a party, you've been in the student center. Okay, those are all places, right? I assume some of you have been. it's really difficult sometimes to pick out the auditory stream, right, that you need to attend to, which is sort of a complex problem, right? How do you know? Has that ever happened to you? You've been out to dinner with someone, for some reason you couldn't seem to pay attention to what they were saying, but the people behind you definitely had an interesting conversation. I would sort of recommend trying to pay attention to the person in front of you. Occasionally, whatever you've ordered ends up on your body, and you didn't mean for that to happen. So that's a thing, right? Jacob, just word to the wise there. If the person behind you seems more interesting than the person in front of you, the person in front of you will do something to make you interested, and pay attention to what they're doing. So, right, Jaron? It's good advice. I'm trying to give you these life lessons. You know, you wear a face full of salsa a couple times, and you learn to pay attention. So, come to somebody else, Sydney, not me. We need to pluck out those sounds, not a big deal. If you do have damage to your auditory cortex, we call that a central auditory processing disorder. This is a hearing deficit for folks. They have a cochlea is fine, auditory nerve seems fine, but something once you get into the brain is not working properly. It's a CAPD, right? There are other reasons that you could become deaf. You could have damage to the cochlea. You could have damage to the auditory nerve, things like that. This is a monkey brain, not your brain. Or Sean, it's your brain before you knew a lot of stuff. There aren't many wrinkles, right? What we see here is that we have, again, that visual information. We have auditory information. We're going to funnel all of this information together, send that up to your frontal cortical regions that are going to give you some higher order processing. And we can start making decisions. We can start navigating through our environment. We can do the things that we need to do to accomplish our goals, right? Any of you have goals? You don't have to share them because I don't care. But I just think you should have goals, right, Jordan? I mean, that's better than not. I think I'm required to say that as well. It's part of these, these university initiatives. We want you to have goals and confidence and try to go out and do things and not embarrass us. So do that. That's my input. Who remembers that what versus where business that we talked about in the visual system? We said there are some brain regions that tell you what an object is. They work on identification, and some objects work on some brain regions work on location of that object, right? We have a similar system in the auditory system, right? Here with what's in red, you can see these guys are telling us where things are. And the blue is telling us what it is. So this is for identification, and this is for location. So completely different brain regions are going to handle that information. Now, eventually we're going to have to bring that together, right? Because not only is it important to know what that noise is, but where it is, because that's going to make a difference in your response to that, right? Okay. If you hear a car, and that car is close to you, you're going to respond differently than if you hear a car that's in some distance, right? So that makes sense. Questions about that? No? We're good? Great. I don't really want to talk too much about music. People ask about music a lot. There are actually specific parts of the brain that take care of the perception of music. So that's something for you there. Anybody listen to music with your earbuds? I should buy stock in like over-the-ear headphone companies, right? And it's like drive you people to make those purchases. They would go great with a self-scratching shirt. It's great streetwear. I mean, you can wear that out to dinner, wear it out to the movies, business casual. You've got an interview or something. Those self-scratching shirts, they really work. I don't know what happened there. There probably should have been a picture, but no worries. All right. Any questions about the auditory system before we move into something else? We're not going to move far. We're just like moving over like this distance from like the cochlea to the vestibular sacs. How many of you love to know if you're upright? Yeah, that's the thing, right? Your vestibular system, this is a sense we don't typically think about. It's going to be involved in like balance and posture, I guess. It's also cool because you can tell which way is gravity pulling you. That's great, right? How many of you love gravity? Few people. That's awesome. Gravity's great. It keeps you from flying off the face of the planet. Okay, so it's really great that that works. Which way is gravity pulling you? Anybody know? Toward the center, right? So the planet is roughly spherical, but it's a little lopsided. And in the middle of that is a whole bunch of iron, right? Fe. And it's massive. It's also really dense. And then here you are. This is exactly where Huntington, West Virginia is on the globe, by the way. I don't... It's a big sphere. Doesn't matter where it is, right? And it's going to pull you straight down to the center. The only time gravity would change for you is, and I'm going to tell you, you guys missed the boat on this, you're definitely not going to be astronauts like with NASA. You're too old and you're not in the right program. You should have been in something, right? You should have been in something else. You might get a go, but you know, let's say it's probably not going to happen. The other way is if you become a billionaire and you pay Elon Musk to shoot you up into space. Now that could still happen. I think it's rare, but keep me in mind if it does. Then gravity might change for you, right? But right now, that's not going to happen. So, what does the vestibular system do? Helps you out with balance, keeps your head upright. Okay, most people walk with their heads upright. Some people don't. Right? We'll talk about why that might be. And it helps you with eye movements. Okay, your eye movements are connected to this. How many of you have ever looked in the mirror and you were trying to look at yourself and you moved your head around, right? You can keep your eyes right where you're looking. Okay. There are other sort of interesting eye movement things related to the vestibular system. The next time you're around someone who's drunk, I know it's not going to be you, but the next time you are, if you get them to lie down on their side, you can actually cause them to have nystagmus. So their eyes will sort of like move over to one side and they'll just kind of twitch and then move back over, back and forth. Yeah, it's kind of interesting. It only works if you're drunk and lying on your side. So you have to have both happen. Or a head injury. Kind of big. By the way, one of those things is reversible and the other is not. I'm not saying like I said go out and get drunk, but you'd probably rather not have a head injury because that might last forever. Just I was going to say a heads up there. Your vestibular sacs, you actually have two sort of vestibular organs. You have your vestibular sacs. These guys are sensitive to gravity. They let you know about the orientation of your head, right? They let you know which way is down. Even if your head is sideways, you still know this way's down, right? You can still feel that. Now you can trick that sometimes. We'll talk about that. The other organ you have are the semicircular canals. These are responsible for detecting angular acceleration or rotation. Anybody a gymnast? Anybody ever rolled down a hill? All right, thanks for being honest there. Just owning up to that. It happens, right? I mean, you know, you could have been like 6. It didn't have to be last week. So while you're rolling, right, your semicircular canals are giving you some information about that, what's going on. Hey, who wants a story about sloths? You guys love sloths? Anybody sloth fan? Some people are. Humans are a surprisingly acrobatic species, right? We're pretty fast, we're pretty mobile. We do tumble and roll around and we do things, right? So it makes sense that we'd have a really well-developed vestibular system. It also makes sense that there would be tight control on that genetically. There's not going to be a lot of variability, right? If you think about someone who has a faulty vestibular system, they have severe problems, right? There are people who have these issues, you know, with their vestibular systems. On the other hand, if you were a species that didn't move very quickly, you probably wouldn't need your vestibular organs to be that great, right? And so natural selection is not going to force you to have, you know, exact, perfect vestibular organs. Sloths are like that. there's actually a wide variety in the quality, shape, and size of vestibular organs in sloths. In humans, our vestibular organs are like 99% identical. I could reach into, you know, any random 5 of you and pull out a vestibular organ and they'll all be identical. You're not going to know the difference. But with a sloth, they would be quite a bit different. Sloths don't, and you're thinking like, well, aren't sloths up in trees all the time? They are. You think, well, what happens if a sloth falls out of a tree? It gets eaten. So there's not really an opportunity to get back in the tree, right? So there's not really a need for these awesome vestibular organs. So there you go. These guys work very similarly to the cochlea, right? Remember we were over here. You've got endolymph in here. That stuff's going to move around. You've got your hair cells. They're going to get deflected. We still have cilia. We're still thinking about tip links. We're thinking about ripping open ion channels, right? It's the same exact process. Here are your semicircular canals. Notice they're oriented at 90-degree angles to each other. And you've got 2 sets of these. You're going to have 1 on each ear. How many of you have ever been in a chair and you spun around really quickly and then you stopped and then the world seemed to move in the opposite direction? Yeah, there you go, right? And somebody admitted to it. Thank you for that. That's an illusion that is tricking your vestibular system and your visual system. It's similar to vertigo. Vertigo is the same thing. Vertigo is a mismatch between your vestibular system and your visual system. In the case of spinning, we're thinking about your semicircular canals and your visual system. So as you're spinning, that endolymph is moving in one direction. When you stop, the endolymph still has momentum, right? And it's going to continue to move. It's going to continue to deflect hair cells. Your visual system has said, I'm stopped, and it's going to try to reconcile. I mean, you have to reconcile, right? That input from the vestibular system and the input from your visual system, and you get kind of a weird experience there, right? It's not a big deal. It's kind of like if you ever have a beverage in a cup of some sort. Let's put a nice handle on that. And you slide that beverage. What happens if you just reach out and stop it? Exactly, right? It just spills out. You have to decelerate that appropriately, right? So you don't lose any of that fluid. Okay. It's the same thing with your semicircular canals. If you just stop that abruptly, the fluid still continues to move. It's going to deflect those cilia on the hair cells. The vestibular system thinks you're moving. Visual system thinks you're not. You're going to have to reconcile that.
How does this relate to motion sickness?
It's very similar. It's a similar mechanism where, again, you're going to get 2 different sets of information, right? Vertigo is a similar story. Your visual system is telling you one thing, and your vestibular system is telling you something else. So folks with vertigo, and I'm not thinking height vertigo, that's a specific kind, but folks with vertigo, visual system says this is up and down. Your vestibular system says this is up and down, right? And so if you're getting that mismatch between the 2, then you're gonna get nausea, you're gonna get vomiting, you're gonna walk with your head tilted, right? Motion sickness is a similar situation where the visual information that you're receiving is not matching what you're getting, right? And this particularly happens when you think about, and there's some different kinds of other phenomena, like have you ever been sitting in a car and you think you're rolling backwards, right? And it's not you, it's the other car creeping forward, right? So that happens. Again, that's a mismatch between the visual system and your vestibular system. So lots of cool things can happen there. Have fun with that. If you were an astronaut, they would test this stuff, right? What they do with astronauts, I've seen them do this, they just grab them and they just throw them up in the air and flip them and see what happens. If you don't vomit, they'll shoot you into space. That's the test process. I don't think that's it. But you're not going to space, I promise you, if you have a faulty vestibular system. Nobody wants, because now if you were to vomit, it goes down. If you vomit in 0 gravity, it just stays, right? Just stays there. All right, in your vestibular organs, you have what we call otoliths. That means ear stones, right? How many of you have heard of Paleolithic, right? The lithic part is stone, right? So otolithic are ear stones. These otoliths are what is being affected by gravity, right? They're being moved or by that angular rotation, and they're just going to go by and deflect these hair cells, these cilia. Talked about all these things. What I didn't say was like your vestibular sacs are actually made up of two organs, the saccule and the utricle. Not a big deal. They're full of endolymph, same as the semicircular canals, and the same as your cochlea. Again, they're set up in that long to short business. You can see that here. This is from the bullfrog. I don't know if you guys like bullfrogs, but this is what their saccule hair cells look like. You can see you have shorter hair cells or cilia in the front and longer in the back. Again, that's so when they lean toward the long side, versus leaning toward the short side, you're going to get different tension, and you're going to open or close ion channels. Don't worry too much about the 8th cranial nerve. You've got a couple branches there, not a big deal. Questions about the vestibular system? Anything else you're just dying to know about it? Ways you can affect your vestibular system. Anybody want to know? One is alcohol. Yeah, alcohol is sort of lipid soluble, right? So it gets in there. What it will do, aside from its effects on some of the cells in the cerebellum and other places, it actually changes the density of the endolymph in your vestibular system, right? So when it changes the density, then those otoliths are going to move at a different speed, and you've not recalibrated for that, right? So those endolymphs are moving, or the otoliths are moving faster through the endolymph, but again, you didn't accommodate for that with the rest of your system, so you're, just rolling around. So there you go. So don't drink and do cartwheels. It's probably good advice, right? They don't tell you about that. There's not a pamphlet on that one, is there? Should be. Other questions? Vestibular system. There are some disorders. I guess, what is it? Meniere's? Is that the name of it? I had a colleague that had that once. If he drank like half a can of Coke, that much caffeine would give him vertigo. It was kind of a weird experience. I saw him one day. I was like, "What are you trying to do?" He had like one of those little small cans of Coke at like a little birthday party or something, and he was like, "I'm thinking I might have to go home." He was like walking to his car sideways. I was like, "I'm gonna wait until you get home before I leave." I'm sure he's off the road. Hey, who's ready to talk about somatosenses? I'm going to raise my hand, Rosie. I'm ready for that. We think about cutaneous senses. Those are going to be your skin senses, right? We're going to think about touch, tickle, vibration, hot, cold, pain, things like that. Those are cutaneous senses. How many of you have heard of proprioception? How many of you know where your feet are, but you can't see them? Anybody in that group? That's because of proprioception, right? Happens all the time. You can close your eyes and still know where your feet are. And if you don't believe me, just give it a try. Yeah, Jacob, is a perfect experiment right there. Write up your experiment, your experience. It'd be great. Kinesthesia is sort of similar, but this is the sort of perception of your own movements, right? That's a great thing. Can you imagine if you were not aware of your own movements? You couldn't sense those as you were trying to move through your environment? It becomes a very, very difficult task, right? Then finally, and I know you've been waiting on this, that magical sense you have to know how much oxygen is dissolved into your blood. Those things are called organic senses. Sometimes we call those visceral. Visceral means guts, right? How many of you know your blood pressure? Nobody knows your blood pressure right now unless you have a cuff on, right? Your body knows your blood pressure. Your body monitors your blood pressure. Your body, you have sensory, you have receptors who are monitoring the pH of your blood, right? How much oxygen is dissolved in your blood, right? And these are constantly making adjustments to your physiological processes. They're sending that information back to your brain. Regions of your brain are saying, okay, we need to release more of this hormone or that hormone, or we need to adjust our breath rate up or down to get more CO2 in or out, right? Okay, so you're constantly making these things. You're not aware of them, so we don't typically think of them as a sense, but they are a sensory process. Using that strict definition we had of a stimulus interacting with a receptor, right? And your body does change its physiological processes based on that. And so I think that's an important thing to consider. One of those, sort of things that we should think about a little bit is pain. Anybody felt pain before? You don't have to answer that. I'm going to assume you have. Pain is a good thing, and I don't mean it in this like weird sadistic sense. It's a good thing so you know not to do something stupid twice, right? If you ever done something stupid and it hurt, you didn't do it again, right? That's how you learn. There actually is endogenous modification of pain. This is actually kind of an interesting process. There are brain mechanisms that are triggered when you experience pain. They'll actually release endogenous opioids, okay? These are opioids that you create inside your body, right? These are the reason that exogenous opioids, opioids you take from your doctor or someone probably less trustworthy than your doctor, have an effect on your system, right? Because you have receptors for opioids, so we can take advantage of that and create pain relievers. Most of these are going to be out in the periaqueductal gray matter. That's where a lot of this endogenous opioid action is going to occur. Okay. When you take opiates, that's going to be inhibitory, right? So we're going to actually sort of reduce the firing rate of neurons, right? We're going to kind of drop that down. So that's pretty cool. Again, a lot of this is going to be in the periaqueductal gray. Don't worry about where that's going. Some of it's in the spinal cord as well. If you destroy the axons coming from these neurons, you actually eliminate the effectiveness of morphine, right? Because these are the cells that are being modulated, right, by by morphine. So if you happen to destroy that, you're not going to receive that information. I don't want you to worry too much about that. What I do want you to think a little bit about is the placebo effect. I know we talked about placebo effects before, but I'd like to talk about placebo effects in a slightly different sense. In this case, your prefrontal cortex is really involved in initiating that placebo effect, right? If you expect decreased sensitivity to pain, so if you expect that what you've done, whatever activity that is going to reduce the pain that you feel, it's actually going to increase activity in your prefrontal cortex, and in fact, you will feel less pain, right? So that's pretty cool. Now, I wouldn't recommend, if you're going in for like knee replacement surgery, just trying to go like placebo your way through the pain, right? That's probably not going to work, okay? There's some limits on this, right? So keep that in mind. And again, a lot of this is connected to the periaqueductal gray. Questions about that? It's pretty good. All right. If you're thinking about your cutaneous senses, I'm not going to expect you to know all this, but you have a number of receptors that are responsive to different types of stimulation, right? This could be pressure, this could be tickle, this could be touch. They're going to be structured differently. So here's one, for example, here's another. They're going to be structured such that they can conduct the stimulus best, right? What's interesting are these sort of free nerve endings. You can't really see this very well, but there's nothing on the ends of they're called free nerve endings, Taylor, so there's nothing there, right? As compared to these Pacini's corpuscles that have this sort of nice big casing, the free nerve endings actually conduct pain responses, right? You want to be fairly sensitive to pain. You don't want to have to induce, because pain, when you feel pain, it's actually because you're inducing tissue damage, right? And you don't want to create a lot of tissue damage to have to create pain. You only want to create a minimal amount of tissue damage to feel pain, and then you want to go, oh, I should probably take my hand off the stove, right? You don't want to just leave it on there for like 20 minutes and go, wow, now I'm feeling some pain. Wonder what I need to do differently. You want to feel that pretty quickly, so you don't want to slow down that process. Notice they're close to the surface. Okay? They're not going to have anything on them. Pacini's corpuscles, they're deeper, right? They're going to require stronger stimulus. Think about things like pressure, vibration. Not a big deal. Here you go. You can read that if you want. The cutaneous senses that you have include touch, vibration, temperature, that's going to be hot or cold, and pain. Now what's interesting, if temperature gets too high or too low, you'll actually start to feel that as pain. Why is that? Things that are really hot or things that are really cold, guess what they cause? Tissue damage. When you cause tissue damage, you're going to feel pain. It's that simple, right? Let's say you have that knee replacement surgery. Does it seem like we should give you, if you think about this, you shouldn't take so much pain medication that you don't feel any pain, right? Because then you might actually try to do something before you've completely recovered, right? And that's a bad idea. So you want to feel just enough pain to know I shouldn't do that, right? That's kind of the amount of pain medication you should take. Hey, how many of you love itch? I know we already solved it with that self-scratching shirt, but itch is actually a surprisingly important sense that I don't think people really consider. How many of you have ever felt an itch and you didn't know why? You're feeling an itch right now and you don't know why, right? Just wait, because we're going to talk about like ticks crawling up your back to your ear, biting you and sucking out your blood and giving you Lyme disease. Sounds exciting, right? Did I tell you my father-in-law had Lyme disease like 2 years ago? That's hilarious. His doctor told him it was a brown recluse spider bite, which, by the way, folks, the word recluse is in there because they typically hide from people, right? So they're not like out in the open to get you, so you don't have to worry about that too much. Also, you can like use the Google and you can type in like whatever bite, and they'll give you pictures, and you can go, that looks nothing like what I have. So maybe I should try something else. He had to go to the doctor like 3 times. Ended up going to the emergency room because he kept having a fever. Spoiler alert, he made it. He's still alive. Lyme disease didn't kill him. I want to give you a good Lyme disease story because, anyway, it's named for Lyme, Connecticut. That's not terribly important to this story. I'm going to draw a map of the United States. That's Alaska to scale, by the way, and then out here's like Hawaii. Primarily it was a disease carried by ticks in the Northeast, right? So that's Lyme, Connecticut's kind of the first place. It was like this giant explosion of Lyme disease. They didn't really have a name for it, so they named it. What's happened is the deer and the ticks and so forth that carry those ticks and that disease have moved. And so now we're starting to see a higher incidence rate of Lyme disease in other parts of the state, like the mid-Atlantic states, which is technically where West Virginia falls, right? So you're starting to see more of that around here. Now this is a wonderful time of year for you to be not inside, right? How many of you like to go outside and like climb rocks and roll around in tree droppings? Those are leaves, right? A lot of folks hike, they go out and they do things at this time of year. Watch out for ticks. That's just my advice to you. Take it seriously. Lyme disease isn't a lot of fun. It's an uplifting story, right, Taylor?
Man, I had a tick this summer. Dying of Lyme now.
Watch out. They're all over the place, right? They just like crawl on you. And you're like, where is that? But here's the thing, like, how big is a tick? Anybody know they're like this big, right? And they're small, and they don't make like you know, if you had a lizard crawling on you, you'd like, oh, geez, I know that, right? You got like some 8-foot iguana crawling up your back. You're like, I think I feel that. But, you all right, Caroline? You're just looking for the iguana? But if you have like a small tick, you're not going to feel that, right? So you need to be extra sensitive to these things that are getting ready to happen. Now, this was a bigger deal back before the invention of something really awesome. There's like really two things that will keep ticks off of you. One are pesticides, right? So there are these like repellent things. The other is a brilliant invention called pants, right? Pants are one of the best ways to keep ticks off your body. So you should wear pants, right? Before pants were a big thing, right? And I know you're thinking like, well, when was this? This was a long time ago. Parasites getting on your body were a serious issue, right? And so you needed to be able to feel those parasites. And that's why you'll have these like itching, crawling sensations sometimes. How many of you have one now? I can tell. So you'll have these sensations right on your body, and you're thinking, well, what is that? I got to check. So you should check. There is some slight chance it could be a parasite trying to invade you, and you should probably check on that. Now, if you're not extra sensitive to that, Jaron, guess what happens? You get a parasite and you die, right? So you want to have that threshold just right there at the edge, right? Just ready. I think right now, maybe there's something crawling on my leg. I'm going to check it. You feel free to do that if you need to. Okay? It's a perfectly natural process. Now, if you walk around and you're constantly scratching yourself, I'm going to report you to somebody. Those are warning signs, right, Jacob? For various things. Not good warnings. There are never good warning signs. Like, man, there's some real warning signs that that kid's going to be smart. Nobody says that, right? Watch out, he's going to be nice. I was thinking about that the other day, too. Like, I try to think about what are extraneous words that people use. One of those is up or down, right? Like, I want to warm up. You don't need the up. I want to warm, right? Right? I mean, Ryan, do you think about that? Can you warm it up in here? No, let's just warm it. I'm not going to warm it down, so you know which way it's going. It's useless, right? I don't know. I think about these things. Somatosensory pathways, don't worry about this too much. You still have a crossover. What's interesting is not all of your somatosensory systems cross at the same place. Some of them cross early. This is your spinothalamic tract for pain and temperature. Remember, those two guys closely related because they both can cause tissue damage. Later, you have things like touch and kinesthesia. Those are going to cross over at a different point. If we're thinking about these receptors, and we've already talked about some cool receptors. We talked about photoreceptors. We talked about inner hair cells. We talked about vestibular hair cells, right? Let's talk about some other receptors. For touch, we want to talk about mechanoreceptors. They need some sort of mechanical stimulation, right? Touch, pressure, vibration. You're going to be feeling textures, tickle, itch, whatever it is, you're going to feel that. For temperature, you have thermoreceptors. Feel warmth or coolness. That's kind of interesting. There are actually a couple kinds of cool. There's like cool because something's cold, and then there's evaporative cool. How many of you have ever rubbed alcohol on your body? And I mean the clear kind that comes in the bottle that says isopropyl, right? You guys use isopropyl alcohol. You've got like a scratch or something you want to clean. You've had a TB test. Anybody had a TB test? Yeah. An injection, they'll rub you with alcohol first, right? So you don't get an infection. Be glad they do that. Infections are not cool, right? Did that feel cool to your touch, right? Because that alcohol evaporates quickly, and it's going to pull some of the, take some of the heat with it. So, I don't know. I thought it was kind of interesting. Here's that dorsal column. that spinal thalamic tract. Again, pain and temperature go together. Touch and kinesthesia go together. They're coming in two different pathways. That's what I want you to know. I don't expect you to memorize dorsal column or spinal thalamic, but just know that they're coming in different pathways. They're crossing at different times. That's going to be an important organizational concept. All right, let's revisit this idea of pain just a little bit, right? So most people have felt pain. If you haven't felt pain, then that's probably because you have some sort of neurological damage or issue, right? So you have to think about that. Now, when we're thinking about pain, there's clearly that immediate sort of sensory component, right? Whatever that is. You hit your thumb with a hammer, cause some pain. And you have some immediate emotional consequences, right? This is not the class where we're going to talk about people who enjoy pain, right? So, Jacob, that's another class they can sign up for. I don't know the number on that, but there is that number. This is going to be the class where we talk about people who don't enjoy pain, which is the standard approach, right? So you feel the pain, that's not good. You've got some immediate emotional consequence of that, right? I don't know, people get upset, whatever. For people who have dealt with long-term chronic pain, right? And this can happen for a number of reasons. There are some severe emotional implications on that, right? So long-term chronic pain is a difficult thing for people to deal with. It can be very complicated. It can be very troubling, right? It's not a lot of fun. There are reasons you can have long-term pain. Some of these could be because you have some structural damage, right? If you think about someone, we've talked about knee replacement surgeries, somebody who's had a knee injury, somebody who has severe osteoarthritis, right, and has degradation of their joints, right? These are all reasons why you might feel chronic pain that are structural, right, that need some structural remedy. Those can be approached to differing degrees, right, and resolved, okay? If there's a structural reason, we can try to remedy that. If there's some sort of conduction pathway issue, we can try to remedy that. There are folks who have chronic pain because they have damage to their central nervous system. They have damage to the brain structures that process pain. Those individuals, unfortunately, are currently without a remedy, right? There really aren't ways for us to treat that type of pain, right? Pain that initiates inside the brain. We can't go in and start zapping your brain, right, and killing off things. We're not really sure how these mechanisms work, so it becomes a really difficult thing. I think one of those is like thalamic pain syndrome. I don't know if anybody's heard of that. That's a pretty severe chronic pain issue that's not treatable as of yet. Just uplifting stories all around. We went from Lyme disease to chronic pain. Things are looking up. Maybe surprisingly, pain pathways are complicated. It makes sense they should be complicated because the survival value of pain is very high, right? I know you guys probably think I don't know how to spell. It's surprisingly hard to talk and write at the same time because you're thinking about the word and then you've moved on to some other word. It actually becomes quite difficult. So the survival value of pain is quite high, right? You know, if I did that and it hurt, I probably shouldn't try it again, right? Because if I keep doing things that hurt, eventually I'm going to cause enough tissue damage such that I end up dying. So you want to avoid it. So you have a ton of these pathways that handle different parts of the pain process. I'm not going to ask you to memorize this. Hey, how many of you know about phantom limb? Anybody know about that one? Almost. We weren't very confident there. Okay. So phantom limb is when you've had a limb amputated and you continue to have sensations coming from that, or seem to have sensations coming from that limb, right? Now the problem is you can't do a lot with that, right? If you're feeling pain, if you're feeling itching in your arm and your arm has been amputated, there's not much you can do. You can't reach out there and scratch it. There was this brilliant guy though, V.S. Ramachandran. He's a brilliant neuroscientist. Still doing some work. he said, hey, let's try this. We'll fix this. So basically he developed a box, a really complicated apparatus. It's a box with a mirror. I know, right, Taylor? Like, I could have thought of that. So what he would do is he would take someone, let's say their right arm had been amputated. He would take someone and put their left arm into the box, and they would have a mirror. And what do you see when you look in the mirror if you've got your left arm in there? You see your right arm. And then you would kind of stick, whatever part of your right arm is still existing into this part of the box you can't see, right? That's pretty cool, right? And then what he would do is he would say, oh, so your right arm's itching? Well, let me just scratch it a little bit. And he would scratch your left arm, but you could look in the mirror and it looked like he was scratching your right arm. I'm like, oh, okay, I feel fine now. It's pretty brilliant, right? Shows you sort of the plasticity of your cortex. It's also related to the rubber hand illusion. Is anybody familiar with the rubber hand illusion? Anybody volunteered at the Brain Expo? Yeah, right? So they have the rubber hand illusion there. You should tell all your classmates to volunteer when that comes back around in March. You guys aren't going to remember that, but you get a shirt, and sometimes they have bags of peanuts. And all the bottled water you can drink in 20 minutes. Lots of children. Yeah. I think last year they had were you there last year? I think last year they had 700 elementary school kids. It's usually 500 to 700. Now they're not all there at the same time.
But you're not responsible.
No, if they're lost, if they get left behind, if they eat a pipe cleaner, it's not on you. Not your fault. But at the Brain Expo they do the rubber hand illusion. It's a similar thing, but it's for someone who has both of your hands intact, right? So what you will do is you'll put the regular hand out there, the hand that's fine. Then you stick a fake hand, so you've got a jacket on them, right? And you stick out the fake hand, and then you take their hand and actually put it in this box, and they can't see it. And what you do is you take a 2-forked paintbrush. It's a special device, and you brush both the rubber hand and their hidden hand at the same time, and eventually they're looking at it, they'll go, oh, I can feel that out in the rubber hand. Sometimes if you're really good at this, you can reach out and you're going to hit their hand, which is really... See, now Taylor, you're getting excited about this.
That's exciting.
This is why they let me do the rubber hand station. And you reach out and you're going to slap them on the hand, and they'll jump back even though it's not their actual hand. So it's kind of an interesting thing. Sydney, you don't seem too excited about that. It's a great way to find out if you want kids, and the quick answer is you don't. Because sometimes they come in groups of 50. Right?
Lost me at kids.
Yeah. It's a lot of fun, though. And you get that free t-shirt, and every year there's this on it. A brain with glasses. And he has legs, and he's always wearing a pair of Chuck Taylors. They don't let me do the drawing station. I don't know why. That kind of looks like an old brain that doesn't have his dentures in, but trust me, it's a young brain. There you go. And I think it has arms, actually, with Mickey Mouse gloves. I've never been to Disney. That's why the hand looks so weird, right? All right, so that's Phantom Limb. Any questions about that? I'm ready to field all of your Jamie Lannister questions. No. No questions there. Don't worry too much about this. This is interesting, sort of. These are the brain regions involved in the placebo effect. Your anterior cingulate cortex is going to be involved in sort of emotional processing. What's interesting too is the nucleus accumbens. This guy, we're going to talk a lot about him later when we talk about drug addiction and the involvement of the nucleus accumbens in drug addiction. This is a cool study. One, you get to shock people. So already, I know, Jordan, that got your attention really quickly. You were over there I don't know, is Pinterest still a thing? It's like something my mom told me about 6 years ago. I don't know how long it's been around. Do people do Pinterest? I never understood it, so I didn't do it. Like, that's the thing, Caroline. You have a Pinterest page. I thought it was just like a page where you put things that you like. Is that right?
Kinda.
Because I thought I can just remember what I like.
It just depends on what you want. Because there's things you can look at, like you can do meal prep on there or do-it-yourself projects.
I have to do meal prep in my kitchen. Can't do it on my computer screen. I'm gonna reach a cheeseburger out of there. I don't know. Maybe I have other things to do with my time. Or I'm just not that interested or Pinterested in things. I'm gonna go around pinching things I'm interested in. I just don't think about this stuff. I really don't know what you do with your time as a group. There's so much you could accomplish if you would just like write all together at once. The world would change. But instead you're gonna Twitter it away and think you did something. That was just me being like slightly older than you and looking down on your ridiculous behavior. I don't do that often, but I did that time, and it was sort of inadvertent. My inner old grouch is coming out. Just waiting until my body matches my attitude, and then people won't think weird things about me. So this is interesting. As we said, Jordan, we're going to shock people. And we're going to gradually shock them more. Right? So that's going to be cool. So maybe even up to like 80 volts. That's something. And then we're going to measure like how much you think a placebo. Now we're not telling you it's a placebo, because then that doesn't work. But we're telling you, hey, take this pill. It could be full of, I don't know, sawdust. We don't really care. And it's going to help reduce your pain. Okay. And then we're going to see how well that works at these different values of a shock, right? And it works better at some than it does others, and that makes sense. What's really interesting about this, the extra wrinkle is, some folks received the placebo and they said it was like on sale. It was like a cheap, low price version. And some folks said this was the regular price version. The folks who thought they were getting the regular price pain reliever reported better effects, better alleviation of their pain. It's the same placebo pill that does nothing for you, but this tells you the expectation value. How many of you buy name brand toothpaste because you think the generic or store brand doesn't work as well? Go ahead, admit it. Everybody does, right? I mean, a lot of people do. It's probably the same exact toothpaste, right? Like, how many ways are there to make toothpaste? There aren't that many. I mean, I'll tell you. Not that I'm a toothpaste expert, but I also use expensive toothpaste, so I can't really complain about that. So there you go, right? So you think you're gonna so you should always let someone else do your shopping and go in and like mark out the price of things and write a higher price on it, so you think the macaroni and cheese tastes better. It's a good idea, right? Also, don't waste your money on expensive wine. Buy one nice decanter, right? And then pour your cheap wine into it. And when you serve it, see, Taylor, this is smart, isn't it?
It's awful.
Why is that awful?
I'm gonna do it though.
I know, I know you will. So then you can serve cheap wine. Now what you should do, because you don't want to drink cheap wine, is keep a bottle back for yourself in the kitchen, right? So you can go back and you can pour your own glass. Just come. Nobody's gonna know. See, that's a good idea, right? Don't worry about this. All right. Any questions about pain placebos, where you can buy nice decanters? It works with beverages like wine. It also works with bourbon. Does not work so well with beer. Beer doesn't really come out of a decanter very well, right? I guess if you had like a tap at home and you could put it in a pitcher, that might work. But you know, you're already, these like canned or bottled, so you're not going to be able to like, you know, buy, you know, Natty Light and try to pour it into a craft beer can and try to serve that to someone. It's not going to be as effective. There you go. Let's talk about taste. In order for you to taste something, a molecule or molecules of that must be dissolved in your saliva, and they're going to have to stimulate the taste receptors on your tongue, right? It's not a shocker. If you taste something, there's part of it in your mouth. That's how that works, right? Different substances taste differently. There are really only 6 qualities of taste, though. Okay? We have sweet, salty, sour, bitter. You have this guy called umami, which means savory. And then the other one is sort of spicy. There might be a new type of receptor folks are working on. This is kind of exciting. For bread. It's actually like a carbohydrate sensitive taste receptor. That's kind of cool, right? I mean, it's like we've known about a lot of these other receptors for a long time, and then all of a sudden it's like maybe there's a new one, and that's really exciting. You don't really need to know too much about this. There are different kinds of receptors. You can combine those and make those as you want. Here are your 5 basic tastes. What's interesting about this is each of these tastes are detecting a chemical. Who remembers that time that I said gustation was a chemical sense? I remember it because I said it. So sour, what's something that's sour? Lemons, right? Lemons are full of acid, right? So they're acidic. Things that are acidic are full of hydrogen ions. So we're detecting hydrogen ions. It's pretty simple. What about things that are sweet? We're looking for glucose, right? Or things that are close enough to glucose to make you think it's glucose when you taste it, such as artificial sweeteners, right? That's how those guys work. Salty, what chemical are we detecting there? Sodium, right? Thanks for not saying salt. I appreciate that. Is the sodium. You're absolutely right. For umami, or savory, we're thinking about glutamate, right? It's an amino acid. We talked about that as a neurotransmitter as well. And for bitterness, I skipped that one. It's plant alkaloids. Most things that are bitter are poisonous. Okay? So when you eat something that's bitter, it's probably going to kill you. Just letting you know. Exactly. When you put something bitter in your mouth, what do? Salivate and spit, right? That's what happens. I'm trying to think of something bitter you could go home and eat that wouldn't kill you. Grapefruit? That's sour. Think it's bitter? If you eat the rind, maybe. I like grapefruits. I even have a grapefruit spoon, which is really like a knife. I don't know why they call it a grapefruit spoon, because it's clearly serrated on 2 edges. And you can't just like put it in your mouth like a spoon and pull it. Yeah, because then you learned that one the hard way. I think I'm going to go to the store and buy a grapefruit now. If you're on medication, don't eat grapefruits. That's just a word to the wise. Because grapefruits will screw around with the enzymes that break down medications. Although, I guess if you're on a budget, you could take half of your medication and eat a grapefruit. You know, if it's expensive medication. Because it sort of like doubles the dose. I wouldn't do that unless you know what you're doing, and you don't, so don't do it. Should always be this like, don't try this at home disclaimer, right? Don't worry about these papilla. This is your tongue, or a chunk of your tongue, right? So you have a thing called a papilla. It's sort of a pit. Inside of this pit are various taste buds. Inside of each taste bud are the taste receptors. So maybe that one's for salty. Maybe that one's for sweet. Maybe we've got an umami in there. Maybe we've got a bitter, right? So they're all going to be in those little clusters mixed and mingled together. When they get stimulated, we'll send a signal down, and it'll go to gustatory cortex. This is the structure of your taste receptors. This is not terribly important unless you're really interested in sort of the genetics of that. So you can sort of skip by that. Again, we only have sort of 5 or 6, maybe an extra receptor there we don't know about yet. But we can taste a variety of substances because it's the activation level of each of those types, right? It's that combination. And so you can activate some a little more than others and others not the same, and get these different combinations. Don't worry too much about, oh, this is interesting. Remember, most of the time when we've talked about sensory systems, we've talked about swapping things, right? Things you hear in your left ear go to your right hemisphere. Things you feel on the left side of your body go to your right hemisphere, right? It's all what we call contralateral. Taste is actually not contralateral, it's ipsilateral. So whatever you taste on the left side of your tongue stays in the left hemisphere, right? It's kind of interesting. But, I mean, your tongue's right there, whatever, you know, there's no need to cross it over. It doesn't, having that location information doesn't, like, well, I can really taste this on the left side of my tongue. Doesn't really help you that much. I should go ahead and sort of debunk some system here. I'm not going to try to draw your tongue, but you can you have taste receptors of all kinds all over your tongue, right? They're not localized to particular regions, okay? I know that's kind of like a thing people tell you, like, sour is only in this part. No, you can taste sour stuff wherever. So don't worry about it. We don't want to go there just yet. I thought there was one more thing with taste that I wanted to tell you. Oh, gustatory cortex. Let's talk about that. Who remembers the time we talked about things that were visuotopic or tonotopic? I didn't talk about somatotopic, right? But your cortex is organized, your somatosensory cortex is organized in an orderly fashion, kind of a shrunken, distorted map of your body, right? Called the homunculus. We'll talk about more. Well, somebody will talk about that more next week, right? The homunculus. So that's interesting. In the gustatory cortex, we don't have that sort of organization. Doesn't really matter. It's just kind of all over the place. Maybe we got a little bit of a salty area there. Let's put it next to a sweet, and then we'll have umami, and over here we have bitter, and then we have some other sort of, you know, chunk of area that's processing different different taste qualities. It's not organized in any sort of way that's noticeable. Okay. There's no real reason to organize it, right? So there's no reason to put the effort into that. Just let the cells go where they go during development and you'll be fine. We should talk about olfaction. That's what we're doing here. It's a smell. This is the other chemical sense. The chemical senses are interesting. They were the first sensory systems to develop, right? And if you think about this, they work really well for something that's in an aquatic environment. Okay, something. How many of you have ever been in water? Nobody's ever been in water. Jaron, you've been in water. Yeah, were you like scuba diving, or just happened to just like, hey, I'm gonna stick my head in here, see what happens? That's cool. What's really great is when you go down in the water, the two senses that are most important to you are definitely vision and hearing, right? Because so much light gets to the bottom of the ocean, and the sound waves travel through water beautifully. No, none of that's true, right? You can't hear anything and you can't see anything, okay? So how are you going to navigate your way around? Well, one of those ways is you can just, while you're down there, take a big gulp of water and you can taste stuff, right? Take a big sniff and you can smell stuff. These are all things you can do underwater that I think are great ideas. Probably not for you, but if you were a fish or other aquatic species, that would make a lot of sense, right? Because you can detect the chemicals that are dissolved in the water, and so that's actually a pretty good idea. I would not recommend taking gulps of water in while you're in any kind of body of water that you might visit, whether that's a naturally occurring body of water, like a lake or a river. And that's for like sort of pollution and bacteria reasons, right? I would also not recommend doing this in a public pool. If you have a private pool, I guess it might be different. You can do what you want. It's not going to be that bad. Public pools, it's like taking a bath with random strangers, right? I don't know about that. Short list of people, Jordan, with whom I'll take a bath. None of them are at the public pool. So, I'm not getting in the public pool. Also, I sink. So, there's no point in me really getting in any pool. I go straight to the bottom. It's like, well, that doesn't help me much. So I have to like stay down in the short end, right? I can't get down in the deep end of the pool and do anything because I'll never float. Could be the water shoes I wear, because I don't want to walk on that either. Your olfactory system, you've got a bunch of olfactory cells in this thing called the olfactory epithelium. Cool thing about the olfactory epithelium, guess what you do there all the time? You make new cells. One of sort of two regions in your adult brain that are continuing to produce new cells. One of the other one is the hippocampus. The olfactory epithelium is the other place. So your olfactory epithelium constantly creating these new cells. What's great about olfaction is you can tell if something is edible or if it's been spoiled. How many of you smell food before you eat it? Yeah, that's a good idea, right? So you don't eat something that'll make you sick. It's a brilliant idea. How many of you smell something and then make someone else smell it just to see? Yeah, that doesn't make any sense, right? Just throw it away. Like if you're questioning it, just don't know, just throw it away. Like, I don't need to give my second opinion on that, right? You're an expert at smelling, same as I am. You already went through that experience. Just out the door with it. I don't know why you think my threshold of eating something is less. It's like, well, maybe you'll eat it. I don't know. I wouldn't eat it, but maybe you would. I don't think so. Just throw it away. We need to know if something's edible or if something's spoiled. If you are smelling something, little pieces of that are up your nose, right? That's how the smell process works, right? Little molecules have to get in your nose to activate your olfactory receptors. How many of you have pets? I don't mean like a turtle. I mean like a dog or a cat. Or I don't know, a weasel. Some people have weird pets. Yeah. You ever smelled that? Guess where that was? Right up in there. How many of you have gone to a public restroom? Yep. There you're not going to go again, are you? Because if you smelled it, but that's okay. I mean, it wasn't probably enough to cause any problems. I guess you'll find out one day. See if you get that when you get Lyme disease. These guys are typically lipid soluble. They're going to be organic. These are the things that you smell. Not a big deal. You do have something called the olfactory bulb. In humans, they're relatively small. They're relatively small because we don't rely on olfaction in the same way that a rat relies on olfaction, right? Rats have huge olfactory bulbs, especially when you consider their relative size to the rest of their brain. They're just massive. If you've ever seen a rat brain looks something like this. You got a little cerebellum back here. And then literally you've got like an olfactory bulb up in the front that looks like that. It's almost like an extra brain on the front, right? If you look at a human, and we're going to scale this, right? So I'm going to draw like a human brain. That's your olfactory bulb right there. It's like this little bit on the bottom. Okay, so they're relatively small. We're not sending a lot to the olfactory bulb. You don't have to answer this. Anybody Catholic or a chess fan? Again, you didn't have to answer it. I don't know why I bothered to look. Why did I ask if you were Catholic or a chess fan? Why is it called a mitral cell? It's shaped like a bishop's mitre. The only two places I can think of... Well, I got a third place now where bishops might go. But that's prison. But the other two places you might find bishops would be Catholic churches or on a chessboard. I'm not going to try to draw a Catholic bishop. I'm going to try to draw a chess bishop for you. That actually looks pretty good, right? It's not so bad. It's not the best. It's not the worst drawing I've ever done. They call them mitre cells or mitral cells because they do look like the bishop's mitre there. All right, here you go. Those are your olfactory receptors. We're going to send information up to that little bit right there. That's the olfactory bulb. From the olfactory bulb, we go a few places. We end up eventually going to olfactory cortex, but we also go to the amygdala. really brilliant for you to be able to smell things and be afraid of those. This works really well if you're like a rat and all of a sudden you smell a big waft of cat urine. That'll definitely induce fear, right? Because cats eat rats, and so you should be afraid of that. Not a big deal. We're also sending taste information to the amygdala, right? And so if you think about that, how many of you have ever eaten something that made you sick? Yeah, and how many of you never ate that again? Yeah, like everybody. Later we'll talk about conditioned taste aversion, right? And it's really a powerful example of learning and memory. It's actually pretty cool. Please write down the restaurant where you ate in town that made you sick so I know not to go there. Right? Try to avoid those places. I had a student in my last class say it was Fazoli's. Like, she said she even still gags when she drives by Fazoli. Like, that's how powerful this is, right? It's like she drives, and you drive by a Fazoli's like all the time in this place, right? There's 2 or 3 of these things. She drives by a Fazoli's and she almost vomits and gags. Yeah. And apparently she said her boyfriend, I'm not sure how long this is going to last, like whenever they drive by Fazoli's, like he always tries to mention, like, hey, it's Fazoli's. So I feel like that's a short-lived relationship. But she said she ate there like 2 years ago. So it's like some time, I guess. I don't know. Sean, you had huh? Yeah, she was in my other class. Yeah, like 2 days ago. Are you serious? They're putting the Fazoli's on campus? And a Taco Bell. Wow. And a what?
It's like an Italian restaurant.
Yeah, I know La Familia.
There's going to be one.
That's one of those, like, one of these is not like the other kind of things. I mean, are they also, like, so here's my question when I think about, like, they're putting in a Fazoli's, I know so bad. They're putting in a Taco Bell. I'm thinking, like, which guy works here who's got a brother-in-law, like, in the toilet paper supply business? Because I feel like that's how these things work, right? Like somebody, Austin's agreeing with me. I feel like there's, like, somebody that's going to, like, take some extra advantage of that, right? I don't know. You guys think about these things, like these connected issues? You got to watch for them, like, in all seriousness. Kickbacks and corruption. You got to fight that. All right, olfactory system. Back to something. I thought there was something else I was going to tell you about. It's probably not that important. But it'll be on the test. So, what's really interesting about this? There's your amygdala. Oh, yeah. We should talk a little bit about the hypothalamus. Why would things you smell go to the hypothalamus? This is a little preview. Later, we're going to talk about hormones a lot. We're going to talk about the reproductive system. The hypothalamus dumps out a bunch of hormones, right? So it might make sense if you're smelling things like pheromones. Now, there's a lot of debate, and we'll talk more about this, about whether or not pheromones actually work for humans or not. Because there's a special organ that receives pheromone information that humans have, but it's not connected to anything. It's like we still have it. We haven't, dumped it off yet. But if you're a rat or some other species, maybe that's kind of important, and then your hypothalamus can dump out some hormones. So, for example, if you are a mouse and you really want to, like, kickstart your fertility cycle, we call it the estrus cycle in mice. We call it the menstrual cycle in humans. It's the same thing. If you really wanted to kickstart that process, one of the best things you could do is take a big sniff of male mouse urine. I know, right? I mean, it's like another reason not to have kids. The only way to be fertile is to smell urine. So that's not true, but we should tell people that. So I guess if you really wanted to, like, increase your fertility, you could go to, like, a truck stop bathroom and just, like, smell for like an hour and then go home. I feel like that would, like, decrease your likelihood, right? Because I feel like when you got home and you smelled like a truck stop urinal, like, your partner would be like, I think I'm a little tired. Things to think about. Yep, there's Taylor writing down about the truck stop urinal right there. Just that.
My favorite topic.
I thought so. There you go. So that's the hypothalamus, the amygdala, hippocampus, no worries. we should think about this a little bit, right? So you've got your receptors. They're going to funnel up to these glomeruli in the mitral cells and then send information from the olfactory bulb up to your olfactory cortex. That's great, right? But you only have like, maybe 1,000 different kinds of receptors, right? But you can identify 10,000 different odors. That's pretty impressive, right? And how you do this is like combinatorial processing, right? So you've got, in this case, we're only talking about 4 different receptors, but look at how many different odors we can identify just with 4 different receptors, right? It works like a bicycle lock. How many of you have a bicycle lock? The old tumbler kind, you know what I'm talking about? It's got like the 4 digits, 0 through 9. That you can create like 10,000 different combinations just with those 4 digits, right? Those 4 places. That's pretty impressive, right? Because you're combining them in different ways, right? You would just have 4 receptors, but you can combine the activation of those 4 receptors in unique ways to create 10,000 different combinations. You're doing that similar process with your olfactory system. You've got different kinds of receptors, and you're combining that activation. So if you look at this, I don't know, that's going to be truck stop urine. This is going to be bananas. I don't know, I'm just making up odors that are, quite effective. This is Taco Bell. It has its own distinct odor, right? Not the various things they serve there. It all kind of works together. And you can see that you're going to activate different combinations, even though sometimes it's the same receptors. Look, there's different receptors that are active as well. That way we know. If receptors A and B are active, that's one thing. If it's A and D, that's something different, right? We can create those different kinds of combinations. Questions about that? That's sort of the end of what I have for today. I don't want to move on